Okay, this video is chapter 34 from the book Medical Reformation. This is called the Cancer Foreword, Foreword for forward here. We'll start out with this normal distribution. And, the typical person is what you would call like an AFC, the average frustrated chump. Taking that abbreviation from the idea of the PUAs, the pickup artist literature. So, a typical person, they're eating a sad diet. They're all fat and stupid, almost every single one of them. And there's not much you can do for them because they're usually too fat and stupid to cure themselves. But if they should, wake up a little bit and decide to try to turn themselves around, they could make great progress. The sooner they start, the better. The longer a person goes on, the more decades of eating poorly and being exposed to toxins, the more, irreversible damage you do to your brain, to your spine, to your heart. The lacto-ovo-pesco vegetarian types are better off. Quite often you'll see doctors in this category. But they, so they'll live an extra 5-10 years compared to the typical chump. But then the health aristocrats are like the top 1%, low fat, low sodium, whole food vegans. Okay. Most doctors don't know anything about nutrition. We've kind of covered that plenty before. Okay, so those are the health aristocrats. Oh, also, the best way to get the most out of this book is watch the videos. If you want to read the book, good. You'll have a chance to get more educated, but you could learn this without reading the book. Just watch all the videos. Hit the little print screen button when you want to save a slide with the best illustrations. Watch the other videos, for example, Dr. John McDougall, T. Colin Campbell, Ruth Heidrich, Chef AJ, and there's some other good ones out there too. And so you just, study the topic at a time. Right now, talking about cancer, I like Ruth Heidrich's experience that she, survived metastatic cancer for another 30 years. She's still alive, doing well. McDougall's great on the subject. T. Colin Campbell's fantastic book, The China Study. China Study's got a lot of videos on there. There's other people who are good. Janet Marie Wakelin, she's good. Chris Wark is good. And there's other ones too. I like Kelly Turner's good. So just watch the videos, soak yourself into the subject. And I think what you'll come out of it is realizing, gee, it sounds smart to reduce your intake of animal protein, animal fat, sodium, etc. Okay, what are some key points? You can do a lot to help yourself and reduce your risk of cancer. Cancer patients can do a lot to improve their chance of long-term survival. The conventional medicine based on the SMT, somatic mutation theory, has largely been refuted by the Genome Atlas project, okay? The metabolic theory of cancer is really good for explaining cancer causation and what you do. Not only does it tell you what caused it, it tells you what to do. For almost any disease, you learn what causes it and you avoid the thing that causes it. And to avoid the thing that causes it is usually a major part of the treatment. It's also the psychological component, lowering your stress level. Psychological stress weakens your immune system. You need your immune system to remove the cancer cells. Okay, and drinking caffeine weakens your immune system. Lack of sleep weakens your immune system. Okay, I also have some videos at other places, at BitChute, Rumble, a little bit at other places like LinkedIn. So if the day ever comes when I have to go primarily to those places, I have that option. I want to be at this place though because this place has the best audience, the best software. It actually is the best site for this sort of material. So I talked about the mystery method with the and I say the average person can be an AFC, average frustrated chump, or an average dumb shit. Okay, and I know I'm being a little harsh there, but I think it's necessary because it's painful. All the things I see. People think, oh, being a doctor is glamorous. No, I'll tell you what being a doctor's life. You look at a hospital, and every single hospital in the Western world, there's like a river of chumps flood into the door every morning. They're fat, they're diabetic, they're hypertensive, with coronary artery disease, and everything related to that. And they all want to go for their tests, like, Canterbury Tales going for a religious pilgrimage. Today is my CAT scan, today's my ultrasound, my MRI or something. And, how many are in line to become low-fat, low-sodium vegans? Next is like 0, 1 out of 10,000 maybe. And my thought process has changed since I was younger. When I was younger, I see somebody with cancer chemotherapy, their IV pulled, the chemo's going in, they're bald in their hair and stuff. I'd feel sorry for them and see, gee, this poor person, I hope everything goes well for them. And I do sometimes feel like that, but I'm also letting you know a lot of times what goes through my mind is, you stupid chump, why didn't you open a book, you dummy? Okay, because lots of patients go for chemo even when it's not appropriate. And what happens in conventional medicine is there becomes established a standard of care. And in conventional medicine, the attitude quite often is, the patient's, almost dead anyways. They're half dead already. Why don't we give chemo a try? But that's based on a thought of chemo with the idea that they underestimate the side effects and they overestimate the value quite often. Don't get me wrong. Chemo for some cancers can be life-saving. It can work wonders in some situations. But for a lot of the common solid tumors, it doesn't work so well. And so really, there should be a lot of thought going into, is it worth doing? Okay, and here's a quote by Chris Wark, a guy who survived aggressive colon cancer for a long time. He wrote a nice book called Chris Beat Cancer. And he says, to just go for surgery and chemo is easy. You just sign the consent form. It's a passive thing to do. To study cancer and to completely change your diet, your exercise, your habits, your attitude towards life, that's difficult. That takes a lot of effort. That's active. Okay, Chris Wark, long-term survivor of colon cancer. So what I'm saying is, he's right. Diet is very important, one of the most important things, but it's more than that. And Kelly Turner wrote that in her book, The Radical Remission. She had like 10 things you should change. Exercise helps. It gets your lymphatics pumping to move your white blood cells around your body to remove the cancer cells, to increase the strength of your immune system. Get your sleep, increases the strength of your immune system. Get some sun to maintain your vitamin D. That improves your overall health. Eat the right diet. Avoid toxins. Make yourself at peace with the other people in your life. Learn to forgive them, forgive your resentments. And, in a sense, try to be like Christ, okay? That makes you nicer and it makes you happier and it decreases the friction in your life. Okay, so I like Chris Wark. I think he's smart. I think he's good. I think he screwed up on one thing, though. He's okay with olive oil, but I think that's ignorant. And I've given lectures on that before. But other than that, I think he's pretty good, what I've seen of him. Also, like I gave you a couple other people already, and there's other ones too. Lorraine's a famous breast cancer patient, survived metastatic breast cancer, and she's pretty bright. So the ADC, the ADS, average dumb shit, typically says, I want this cancer gone. I'm ready for surgery. Can't you cut it out? Cut it out of my body. Of course I'll take chemo. They don't think. A wise person would say, what are the pros and cons of surgery? What are the pros and cons of chemo? What are the pros and cons of radiation? And really put a lot of thought into, is this the right way to go? And the cancer's probably been around for a long time, like likely a decade or longer. It just wasn't visible initially before or diagnosed. So you don't need to rush into treatment that day. The smart move is spend some time reading and thinking about it so you could make the wisest choice. Because once you go down that path, a lot of times you can't turn back. Okay? So for myself, unless chemo was proven to generate a really big improvement in survival, like more than 40%, I wouldn't do it. Because you're guaranteed to have the unpleasant side effects. And you need your immune system to remove metastatic cancer cells. So why risk wiping out your immune system? Okay? Oh, and this was just, I'm talking about how I give my talks. I kind of jokingly say, I tend to do them like this, I work and connect things together till you come to an AO, academic orgasm, but then I'll always get back down to the basics. So sometimes if it seems too complicated, just hang in there and I'll get back to the basics. I'm trying to make it interesting for audience at all levels of experience. Let's see. Rule number 1 of preventing cancer. Oh, what is this here? I usually only have one illustration per page, and that's because if I try to put more than one illustration per page, the picture formatting part of the program starts going crazy, and it's real hard to do. Okay, so rule number 1 on preventing cancer. No meat. Nothing from an animal. No meat, not one bite. No dairy, not one drop. No oil, not one drop. Okay, you don't want to be doing things that increase your risk of cancer progression. Okay, meat has a different amino acid composition. For example, more methionine, more leucine, so it has more of an activation effect on mTOR. mTOR is like a nutrient sensing pathway, like a building contractor that waits till it has all its materials available before it builds. And the point is that before it builds in this context means before the cell can replicate. You want to slow down cell replication. So that's one of the things that appears to be helpful. And T. Colin Campbell in his research, when he would feed 5% animal protein, the cancers grew very slowly, or not at all. When he would feed 20% animal protein, the cancers would grow relatively quickly. You don't want that. So he was able, in his animal experience, to some extent, turn on and off, largely turn on and off cancer growth. Pretty valuable. The same things that cause cancer tend to be the same things that promote it. There's more to it than that, but there's truth in that. So what I do is I try to live the anti-cancer lifestyle as best I can. Okay, and the same lifestyle and diet makes you healthy in every other way. As far as I know, compared to all the doctors I know, and I know lots of them, I see them every day, I'm aging the best out of all of them for my age at 60 years of age. I don't take any pills. I'm not on any medications. I don't have any health problems other than being bald. I can deal with that. Oh, and I'm aging better than my wife, which I find quite amusing. Let's see what else. Okay, here's a chart of cancer patients. And basically the gist of this was that the more animal protein they ate, the more cancer the population had. And the thing about it is animal protein correlates with animal fat, saturated fat. Okay? Dietary cholesterol also correlates with the amount of animal food you eat and the SAF fat and your blood cholesterol. So meat consumption is also associated with an increased insulin-like growth factor level and higher insulin levels because of the fat. So what I'm saying is these are all confounding variables. It's difficult to separate out which one's having the biggest effect. Now, T. Colin Campbell would say that he thinks animal protein is the most important thing. And look at all these cancers. These are common cancers. Breast cancer, esophageal cancer, uterine cancer, colon cancer, prostate cancer, pancreas cancer. Low-fat, low-sodium vegans, they get hardly any cancers. That's the group you want to be in. There's no 100% guarantee, but you get the best possible odds. Okay. All animal cells have their plasma membrane stabilized with cholesterol. So when you eat animal food, you get the intrinsic cholesterol itself, plus the SAT fat causes the synthesis of more cholesterol. So it's a double screw job. Animal protein causes more activation of mTOR. mTOR means mammalian target of rapamycin or mechanistic target of rapamycin. And that comes from like the island of Rapa Nui, Easter Island, where they have those statues. And basically it's a nutrient sensing pathway in a cell like a building contractor, waiting till it has all the building materials available before it can build, meaning for the cell to replicate. So you want to prevent mTOR from being activated as best you can to slow down cell replication and slow down cancer replication and growth. Animal proteins got more leucine and methionine. We talked about that. Preventing mTOR activation is like using the Fabian strategy that the ancient Romans used to fight against Hannibal. Okay, so the Fabian strategy is just delaying tactics, supply line tactics, trying to slow things down, because Hannibal was a badass. None of the Roman generals could compete with Hannibal in a head-to-head combat. He would always kick their ass, and he crushed Rome many times. However, when Fabius Maximus used his Fabian strategy, he kept slowing down Hannibal and interrupting his supply lines, making it very costly, expensive, and unpleasant for Hannibal to keep hanging around in Italy. Fabius said, Hannibal is far from Carthage. His supply lines are weak. If we can deprive his army of food, they will shrink and retreat. So Fabius won the victory over the great Hannibal by starving him into retreat. And so what I'm trying to show you is like the typical dummy thinks, oh, well, we've got technology. I want science, science. Okay, I've been, studying science in great detail since I was, 18 years old, 17 years old. And I can tell you what the word science to me nowadays means mostly is a joke, okay? Most of what is called science is all fake advertisement by companies. The companies, they own the journals, they own the scientists, and they just fund articles to promote their drugs or their supplements or whatever it is. And to get a sense of reality, here is the cancer deaths over time. These are cancer deaths 1972 to 1974. Okay, look at them now, 1992 to 1994, and they really haven't changed much, okay? More people are actually dying of cancer nowadays. So what I'm trying to say is all of their billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars spent on cancer research is really mostly a joke. They've discovered almost nothing useful. And why is it that almost nothing useful comes out of this research? Because the goal of the research is not to help the patient. The goal of the research is to make money. So they just want to tweak the results in such a way that they can show some small benefit from their drug, and then they could sell it for millions and millions and millions of dollars. All right? So I tell you that because the typical stupid person says, I put my trust in science. And they think that's something smart to say. What they're really saying is, I don't trust myself because I'm too lazy and stupid to learn anything. And I just want my doctor to, try a Hail Mary pass with the latest patented chemo and hopefully it'll work, okay? And don't get me wrong, sometimes chemo can work. Sometimes it is a good thing. But I can just tell you, lots of times it's not. And you don't want to be stupid. Okay, the chemo company and the hospital, they get their money whether the patient lives or dies. Nobody cares if the patient dies. Okay, your doctor is going to have to see 30 patients a day is pretty typical. Do you think they care what happens to you? Probably not, okay? They're under a lot of pressure, go faster and faster. In all Western hospitals, there's always some bean counter. And you can think of him as like one of Pharaoh's henchmen with a whip. Faster, faster, I want more money. Faster, you lazy slave. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is conventional medicine has decided that it's not going to track outcomes. It's just going to go by productivity, efficiency. So they use this idea of the standard of care as a substitute for true quality. True quality would be what cures the most people. And they could never, ever do it. I've never been ever in my whole life ever seen or even heard of a conventional medicine hospital where they keep track of patient outcomes. And the reason's obvious. If you kept track of patient outcomes, let's say for coronary artery disease, you would see that Caldwell Esselstyn's program was working in over 99% of his patients. And that would make you have to give up doing a lot of these stents and these open heart surgeries. Each open heart surgery, $150,000, each stent about $30,000. The hospital would lose millions and millions and millions of dollars. They're never going to allow that. The drug company's never going to allow it. They control everything. They've got billions of dollars. They run the show. Doctors are just highly educated assembly line workers in the whole process. They don't have the ability to change things because if they did, they would have to go against the standard of care. And if the patient had a bad outcome, they could sue the doctor for not following the standard of care and they would lose. The doctor would lose. So they're not going to do it. Okay? In a sense, by mistreating the patient, the doctor is protecting themselves. And it's sad, but it's true. And it's never going to change because there's no money in it. All the money says go with the standard of care. You can't get in trouble and everybody's happy, except the patient, but nobody cares about the patient. Okay? The standard of care is designed for low-functioning people. And a lot of patients, they're really pathetic, okay? They're cognitively slow. They're lazy, they're unmotivated, they're serious functional illiterates, if not illiterate. So they're not going to take initiative to help themselves. And you do need a standard of care for all these people because there's tons of them. And some people say, oh, am I being mean? They think of themselves as a patient. The average patient would never in a million years watch one of my videos. They're far too kind of dumb, just to be quite frank. The people watching my videos are smart people, okay? Probably the average IQ of a viewer of my videos is probably about 130, okay? And the reason I go through that is typical patients are like alcoholics, cigarette smokers, heroin addicts, opioid addicts, really stupid people. And the reason is stupid people are sick all the time. They're constantly getting sick. They constantly have problems. I've seen tons of patients in my career, tons of them, that have 3 simultaneous cancers, okay? They've got all these bad habits. So what I'm saying is the average person watching my videos is like this intelligent, motivated person who wants to optimize their health, okay? That's not the average patient at all. But the good news is, if you are that type of person, you can dramatically improve your health, dramatically reduce your risk of cancer, and I believe likely dramatically improve your outcomes with cancer, but I'm not allowed to confidently say that, so I won't confidently say that. High-functioning people should want more than the standard of care. They should want optimal care, which very often is different than the standard of care. Standard of care is lowest common denominator. Okay. The reason optimal care not routinely suggested is because there's no money in it and it depends on the patient. All right. So to really optimize your chances, you got to do some studying on your own. Not a whole lot, but you got to watch a couple educational videos or read some books. Especially T. Colin Campbell's The China Study would be the best book to read for just understanding cancer. Also, my book. I wrote a book. Where the heck is my book? I wrote a book called. Well, you can just look at my Med Reformation book. where I kind of made things a little more concise. But I wrote a previous book all about cancer, and I think it's the best thing ever written about cancer in its own way. T. Colin Campbell's is the best pure research outcome book of animal studies. It is. Mine, is, as far as I can tell, is the other best book on cancer, talking about it more from a human research point of view. Let's see. If a person's willing to study and learn, they can achieve optimal care with optimal odds, okay? This is showing the amount of cancer foci in animal studies depending on how much animal protein they got. And look, you feed them 20% animal protein, they get more cancer. And there's never a point where it goes to zero. It just keeps going lower. And T. Colin Campbell made the point. That's why you should want to give them 0% animal protein, because it looks like the line will keep on extrapolating down closer to zero. So why not do what is best? Okay. Okay, so when I say TCC, that means T. Colin Campbell. He says that Americans are on average eating about 15% protein. I don't really believe that. I think they're eating more than that, because typical animal food like salmon is 50% protein, 50% fat. And most of the non-vegan Americans I know, they eat a lot more meat than that. So I'll bet it's more than that. So he's sort of claiming typical Americans are eating about 15% protein. I forget what number he gave for vegans, but usually for vegans they're eating about 10% protein, but it's plant protein. And T. Colin Campbell, he deserves a Nobel Prize, but he'll never get it because they don't want the public, because that would publicize him. They don't want him to become more famous than he already is. They don't want people to know about this. TCC showed animal protein that rodents got, the more they got, the more cancer they got. And when they stopped giving them animal protein, their cancers routinely stopped growing. That's a big point. Their cancers routinely stopped growing. There was some Irish doctor, I think his name was John Kelly. He wrote a book called Stop Feeding Your Cancer. And in his experience, it's just anecdotal, small groups of his own personal patients, but they seem to do far, far, far better when they ate a plant-based diet. Okay, so T. Colin Campbell was so confident of the results, he repeated his cases over and over again, that he came to the conclusion that animal protein was the #1 cause of cancer, the #1 promoter of cancer. And his wife had a melanoma. He told her go vegan, and she did great. So TCC says there is no safe level, lower level of animal protein. It is best to not eat any at all, not one bite. Sort of like what Caldwell Esselstyn is to coronary artery disease. T. Colin Campbell is sort of that to cancer, okay? Not one bite. Esselstyn says not one bite of meat, not one drop of dairy, not one drop of oil. And T. Colin Campbell is saying the same thing for avoiding cancer, reducing risk of cancer. And can you see the consistency there? The same diet is the best one to prevent coronary artery disease. It's the same thing to prevent cancer. So, and why would that be? How about because it's the species-specific diet that humans should eat? And it goes back to the Bible too, Genesis 1:29, eat plant foods, okay? All right, the wise person knows best diet is 0 animal protein. Okay, this includes dairy. Dairy is just like liquid milk. Like liquid meat. And same, all the dairy is bad for you. Cheese, yogurt, it's all bad. Okay, and I've made this diagram before. Basically, you are here. Here's the map of the rest of your life. You go low-fat vegan, and it should also be low sodium, and avoid toxins, avoid processed food, etc. And you'll probably keep the Johnson working much longer. You don't need, I'm 60, I don't take any pills. I got no health problems. You got a good chance to probably live on average to about 90. If you go down the typical path of the typical chump, you're just going to end up on a bunch of drugs, and the drugs don't work so well. Then you're going to go for a bunch of surgeries. So drug, chop, 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 bye-bye money. You'll be poor, you'll be suffering, and you will die prematurely. What's good about that? And you'll be cognitively slow. And, you can go around giving all these sad stories, but why not just prevent the problems, and you can give a happy story, okay? I'd rather have people hate me because they think I'm stuck up than feel sorry for me because my life's a disaster, okay? Yeah, I'm stuck up. Too bad. Good. It's good to be a little bit stuck up. And the reason I say that is if you're not a little bit stuck up about who you are and what you should be doing and what is right for you, what your priorities and goals and how your time should be spent, you can get dragged into BS constantly. Because you go to a party, they're going to pressure you to drink alcohol or smoke a cigarette or some other stupidity. Okay, average dummies, they're sick. Okay, I went through all that. Here's William C. Roberts, the best cardiac pathologist in the world. Sloop is a pathologist, the other famous atherosclerosis pathologist, but he's does other pathology, not just hearts. William C. Roberts says if you feed a herbivore a high-fat diet, they will all develop atherosclerosis, 100%. When you get atherosclerosis, you cause tissue ischemia, and you increase the risk of cancer. And by the way, this is just the introductory chapter to give you an overview. I'm later going to go into way more detail on all this stuff. Humans are designed to be herbivores. That's why our teeth are flat. We got canines. They're little miniature canines, okay? They're a joke. I gave the metaphor before that if you're walking down a path in a forest and you see a dead deer on the side with the flies buzzing around it, do you want to get down on your knees and take a bite out of it? No, it's disgusting. We put a bowl of fruits on the table. You salivate. You're made for that. Our teeth can't even pierce the flesh of the deer, okay? They're a joke. Okay, atherosclerosis blocks arteries. Oh, and then people also say to me, well, we've got tools. We don't need to use our teeth. You know what? Our ancient caveman ancestors didn't have that much of fancy tools. You're going to use a rock to open up the skin of the deer? Good luck with that. You know, doable, but not so easy. Atherosclerosis causes tissue hypoxia. Hypoxia causes cell dysfunction, can injure the mitochondria, lead the cell to undergo a Warburg transformation, and become cancerous. Okay. Complete hypoxia, cells die, but quite often there's sort of mild to moderate hypoxia, and the cell initially becomes dysfunctional, then gradually dies through apoptosis. That means apoptosis is slow cell death, programmed cell death, giving it time to recycle itself. Okay, and some cells will just revert to a primitive pathway. When the Earth first formed, there wasn't any oxygen. Then gradually oxygen started becoming more available, and it is thought that a lot of the primitive cells maintain the ability to switch their oxygen metabolism on and off to revert back to anaerobic metabolism like glycolysis in the cytoplasm in times of low oxygen. And it appears that that's what cancer is doing, is hypoxia induces a mitochondrial injury, and some cells can revert back to their cytoplasmic pathways of glycolysis and survive. Okay, that's an oversimplification, but it's the gist of what happens. Okay, so that the cancer cell is really like a cell that has transformed itself into becoming like an anaerobic bacteria, and they behave like an anaerobic bacteria. They don't care about doing their job as part of an organ system, as part of a pancreas cell, a breast cell, a liver cell, a whatever cell. They just want to replicate and grow, okay, like a bacteria. The Warburg effect is like one of the most important, probably the most important thing you can know about cancer is a general understanding of the Warburg effect. We'll talk about him more later, but basically he was a German biochemist who won the Nobel Prize in 1931 for figuring out that hypoxia, lack of oxygen, induces cancer. All right, so here's a chart of the different diets. You know, the American diet is the standard American diet. They eat a lot of saturated fat. Everything really high is in red. A moderate amount of oil, sodium, etc. They got tons of cancer, tons of atherosclerosis, so lots of heart attacks, tons of impotence. Yeah, they say by 60 years of age, 60%, at least 60% of men in a Western country are impotent. 30% by 30, 40% at 40, 50% at 50, 60% at 60. So, not good, because like, you know, you go to a party or something, and there's always somebody who means well saying, oh, why don't you enjoy life? Why don't you have some of this junk food or alcohol? And sort of, I'm real polite about it unless I know them pretty well. Then I'll say to them, you know, how is being fat, sick, and stupid going to help me enjoy life? Okay. The East Asians, that's like Japan, Korea, China, big time rice eating. They also tend to eat tons of sodium. They also tend to smoke a lot. Despite all that, they don't get much diabetes because it's a very low-fat diet. White rice is only 1% of the calories from fat. But they still get sick, okay? They still get a lot of hypertension. That'll cause intracranial atherosclerosis, so they have a high rate of stroke. Relatively low amount of cancer, like compared to Papua New Guinea, where they eat sweet potatoes, which also has only 1% of fat. The Japanese and the Papua New Guinea smokers have much less lung cancer, for example, than the Americans do. And I think it's because of the high-fat diets and the amount of ischemia. There's less ischemia because of the low-fat diet. So despite the fact they smoke as much or more than Americans, they have less lung cancer. Papua New Guinea, it's over 6 times less lung cancer than Americans did. Okay, what about India? So the thing with India is I was kind of initially unaware of this. I know lots of Indian doctors. Most of them are skinny, pretty healthy looking. But it turns out India, even when they're skinny, they're often not very healthy. And I think the reason for it is because of the large amount of oil they eat. They eat a lot of fried food, most of them. And I can tell you, like, I have a friend, an Indian doctor, he's a real energetic, bright, nice guy. And I hadn't seen him for a couple of months. Okay. And so I saw him then after a couple of months gone by, and I'm like, how you doing? What's new? And he goes, oh, I was dead. And I go, what do you mean you were dead? And he goes, I died. I had a heart attack. I had to be resuscitated with a defibrillator, and I came back to life. Now I'm okay. And I'm like, how did that happen to you? You're always exercising, running around. You are skinny. You look good. How did that happen to you? And he said, I don't know. And I go, hold on a sec. Do you eat oil on your food? He goes, yeah, you have to for cooking. I said, no, you don't. That's the answer, okay? Because I couldn't find anything else unhealthy about this guy's habits. Cooking oils are much more toxic to arterial health, to intestinal health than people realize. So look down here at the low-fat, low-sodium vegan diet. It's low in saturated fat, low in oil. There's no animal protein. You follow this pathway, you've got the lowest possible risk. Why wouldn't you want to do that? The lowest possible risk of impotence, keep the Johnson working. Why wouldn't any guy want that? Okay? You virtually never get type 2 diabetes. It's like everything is good. This is like winning the jackpot at Vegas, It's all cherries. What more could you want? In life, that's as good a deal as you get. This is the earthly equivalent of earth heaven, okay? That's as good a deal as you're going to get. All hearts, all cherries, perfect, jackpot. Why wouldn't you want that? People say, oh, I can't eat salad, I can't give up meat. And I'm like, you know what? Have fun going for surgery and chemo like a dummy. All right. So these are my coaches at Stanford. These are the Schultz brothers, world famous wrestlers. They're both world and Olympic champions, NCAA champions. Okay, and the reason I show you their pictures, you can see that's Stanford in the background. These are the hills we ran sprints on. So when we ran sprints as a team, he's skinnier now in this picture. He's got competition coming up. But originally, in our first practice, he was kind of fat. And we ran sprints and he was slow. This is Dave Schultz, by the way, and this is Mark Schultz. And the other thing was we lifted weights and he was weak. And I'm like, usually wrestlers, like Mark's really strong, super strong. Okay, but typical wrestler is super strong, built like Mark, okay? And Mark's really fast, all right? But Dave was slow. And I'm like, how did a guy who's fat, weak, and slow become world champion? In the world of wrestling, he's kind of like what Bruce Lee is to martial arts. He had incredible technique, okay? And there's an exponential effect you can get from learning technique, but what I'm getting at, and the reason I'm showing him is something that he did help me for cancer. I learned a ton of stuff from Mark about the psychology of becoming mentally strong. From Dave, I learned a lot about incrementalism and technique more so, okay? So I'm going to get into what that's about. The Schultz strategy and incrementalism strategy. When Dave was young, he had dyslexia, and at school he was fat, and the other kids would tease him. They say, "Hey, you fat dumbass," okay, you fat stupid dumbass. So his nickname was Pudge, and he would get picked on. He went out for the wrestling team. He liked it, and he had a knack for learning technique. And so he wanted to get good fast. So even though he's in grade school, or then junior high, he'd go to practice at the high school, which was Palo Alto High School. Palo Alto is a suburb right next to Stanford. Then he would ride his bicycle while he was in junior high, go over to the college team and practice with the college guys at Stanford. And he just focused on improving his technique. Every little thing he could learn. Like if you ask a typical college wrestling coach, how do you finish a single leg? He's going to say, well, you can do a dump like this. You can do a treetop like this. And he's not going to have, or you can change off to a double, okay? He's not going to have much more to say than that. Dave will go through. He'll spend hours with you going through all your options on finishing a single leg from the feet, finishing a single leg attack from the knees, and he just knew more technique than anybody. So what I'm trying to say is I used his technique to get better at school. I wanted to become really good at school, and at first I was real scared of him. I'm just like this little freshman in the room, the wrestling room, and he's like the hero of the world, him and Mark, world and Olympic champions, so I was kind of scared to talk to him. But I did apply his techniques to school. Say, I will try to get good at every single possible thing I can get good at. Just like he got good at every possible technique you could and sought out. I mean, just to give you an example of his personality, he taught himself how to speak Russian so he could travel to Russia and learn Russian technique. Okay? They were the best wrestlers in the world at that time. So anyways, I would ask myself a question: how can I develop the best memorization techniques? How can I develop the best note-taking techniques? How can I get the most out of class? Okay, well, why am I going through all this stuff? Because you can do the same thing with cancer. How can you get the best stress reduction? How can you get the best possible diet? How can you get the best possible avoidance of toxins? How can you get the best possible sleep? All of these things will help you to be successful. And it really comes down to, he's a poor guy, and so was Mark and Dave were poor, okay? How do you win when you don't have any money? How do you win when you don't have much talent, okay? And the way you get the best possible result is it's this philosophy of incrementalism, which means learn everything you possibly can about your endeavor. Willingness to learn is a great talent. Learning a bunch of small skills that add up can become a great talent. You can learn everything there is to know about cancer prevention, about optimizing outcomes. And all these little things, when you add them up, they can be a big deal. So here's Mark and Dave, another photo of them after they won the Olympics. That's Olympic gold medals they're both wearing there. And from Mark Schultz, I learned like intensity of purpose. So this is Mark Schultz and this is Dave Schultz. He wrote the book Foxcatcher. It became a real famous movie, the Foxcatcher, the movie. And there were like 3 documentaries or 4 documentaries made about it. They're all real good. Their documentaries were better than the movie. So anyways, once I started hanging around with them, my wrestling performance dramatically improved. And so what I'm trying to say is, if you take this attitude of I will learn everything I can about preventing cancer and about minimizing the risk of cancer growth, you've got a good chance to dramatically improve your health. Okay, so me when I was a little freshman at Stanford. Okay, we're not going to get into all that. This is our wall of fame for wrestlers. The Schultz brothers on top, and then all of us aspired to kind of get into this next row. Okay. So I kind of went into this whole big thing. You've heard me talk about incrementalism, but that's the gist of it. To learn everything you can in your field. Here's the 5 blind men and an elephant, or 6 blind men and an elephant. This is sort of an old Indian proverb, folk tale, fairy tale, great story. Each guy sees his own little tiny thing. These are all blind men. The blind man with his hand on the tail thinks it's a rope. The blind man touching the side thinks it's a wall. The one touching the leg, and there should be 6 of them, thinks it's a tree. The one touching the ear thinks it's a rug. So the point of this is you want to learn everything you can about cancer. One little extra factoid might be the difference between you getting an extra year or 2 of life. And then eventually what you want to do is be able to come from above and have like a bird's eye perspective looking down. That's what you want. Okay, so yeah, you don't want to be emotional. Aristotle said the first step to an intelligent conversation is to remove emotion. The typical patient, in my experience, they just rush into surgery or chemo. They don't even study their options. They don't even study their disease. They don't know anything. They think it's a doctor's job to cure them. The reality is the people who get the best outcomes are the patients who do the most to help themselves. And I often see these patients who just jump into surgery, have complications, suffer a lot, Think about it. There's another old saying, don't just do something, stand there and think. In the medical world, the price for being an ignoramus is very high and often very painful and culminated with an early death. Okay. Well, these are just some more of the people who've had great results, great outcomes. All of these people, had incredibly good outcomes. So I would study all the people who had great outcomes. Okay. And the healthiest people in the world are all religious, their population. Religion can improve your outcomes a lot. My mom, they thought she'd be dead in like 2 years. She lived 11 years, and I'm the one who screwed up because at that time I thought you just send them to a specialist. I didn't realize you could learn and do a lot on your own and improve prognosis. She did all kinds of things. She went on a religious pilgrimage to Medjugorje. She was a very altruistic, nice lady in the sense that, my dad made plenty of money, so she didn't have to work at an employee, wage labor job. She was a board of directors at an orphanage. She was a minister of care at the church. She was in the tennis team. She was a tour guide at the Frank Lloyd Wright Architectural Studio. She was a tour guide at the Art Institute. She loved all that stuff. And that made her happy. And I think the fact that she loved being with her family. She was like the big director of the whole family, the whole extended family. All of those psychological things. And she exercised and everything. She did everything right except diet and toxicology because she didn't know it. Anyways, I'll talk more about that at a later time. And so that's it for this chapter 34 of the Medical Reformation book. Hope that was helpful.